My name is Aria, and at 30 years old, I never expected to be caught in a family storm that would tear my world apart. I had moved back home temporarily to help my dad recover from knee surgery, thinking it would strengthen our bond as a family. Everything seemed fine until my mother's controlling behavior escalated into something I couldn't have imagined. The words she screamed still echo in my mind: "Get out," and "never come back." So I did exactly that. Let me know where you're watching from, and if my story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear how my dad's simple question weeks later revealed a shocking family betrayal. Growing up, I always had a complicated relationship with my parents, especially my mum, Janet. She was loving but particular about how things should be done her way. My dad, Robert, was my rock the calm presence who balanced out mum's intensity. Despite occasional tension with mum, we maintained what I considered a healthy family dynamic. They supported me through college, celebrated my graduation, and cheered me on as I built my career in graphic design. By age 30, I had established myself as a successful freelance graphic designer with a solid client base. The flexibility of remote work was a blessing that allowed me to maintain my independence while still being available for family. When Dad called about his scheduled knee replacement surgery, I didn't hesitate to offer my help. The doctors had explained that the recovery would be challenging, requiring consistent physical therapy and assistance with daily activities for several weeks. We could hire someone, my dad had suggested during our phone call, always considerate of my time and career. "Absolutely not," I responded firmly. "I can work from anywhere. Besides, it would be nice to spend some time with you both." The gratitude in his voice confirmed I was making the right decision. I sublet my apartment in Portland, packed my essential belongings, and drove the 3 hours to my childhood home in the suburbs of Seattle. The first 2 weeks were surprisingly smooth. I established a daily routine that accommodated my work schedule while allowing me to help Dad with his exercises and drive him to physical therapy appointments 3 times a week. I took over most of the cooking and grocery shopping to lighten Mum's load. In the evenings, we would watch Dad's favourite mystery shows together, almost like old times. "Your carbonara is even better than the Italian restaurant downtown," Dad commented one evening during dinner, his eyes crinkling with genuine appreciation. Mum nodded in agreement, though I noticed her slight hesitation before complimenting my efforts. "It is good, though a little more pepper would balance the flavours better." These small critiques were typical of my mother, and I had learned long ago not to take them personally. She meant well, I told myself, just expressing her opinion as she always had. During those initial weeks, I still maintained my personal life as best I could. My best friend Samantha called regularly, providing updates on mutual friends and listening to my stories about being back home. "How are you holding up with your mum?" she asked during one of our calls, knowing our history of occasional clashes. "Better than expected," I answered truthfully. "She has her moments, but we're both trying. Dad being the buffer helps." What I didn't mention was my recent breakup with Jason, my boyfriend of 3 years. The relationship had ended amicably 2 months before Dad's surgery, when we both realized we wanted different futures. He dreamed of settling in his hometown in Michigan, while I had my sights set on eventually moving to Seattle permanently for a creative director position that had been hinted at by one of my major clients. The potential job opportunity in Seattle was another reason moving back temporarily made sense. It would give me a chance to network locally while helping my family. Everything seemed aligned for a positive transition period in my life, despite the emotional adjustment of the breakup and concern for my father's recovery. My workspace was set up in the guest room, transformed into a functional home office with my equipment. Mum had initially suggested I work at the kitchen table to be more sociable, but I gently explained the need for a quiet environment for client calls and focused creative work. She acquiesced with minimal resistance, which I took as a promising sign. In those early days, we fell into a comfortable rhythm. Dad was making steady progress with his physical therapy. Mum seemed appreciative of my help around the house, and I was managing to keep up with my client deadlines. There were small moments of tension, like when Mum rearranged my carefully organised workspace while cleaning or questioned why certain tasks took me so long to complete, but nothing that felt unmanageable. If only I had recognized these small moments as warning signs of what was to come. By the 3rd week of my stay, subtle changes in my mother's behavior became more noticeable. What started as occasional suggestions about my work or household contributions evolved into constant criticism. Nothing I did seemed to meet her standards anymore. "Aria, the bathroom is still damp after you cleaned it," she remarked one morning, running her finger along the shower door. "And these streaks on the mirror, did you even use proper glass cleaner?" I had spent nearly an hour cleaning the bathroom the previous evening, using the exact products she had specified. "I did, Mom. Maybe the lighting is showing marks that weren't visible last night." She sighed dramatically. "When you have your own home, you can clean however you want. But while you're here, please do it properly." These interactions became increasingly frequent. My cooking, once praised, now received detailed critiques about everything from ingredient choices to presentation. My clothing choices drew comments about professional appearance, even on days when I had no video meetings and was simply working in the home office. "Should you really wear those sweatpants all day? It sets a poor mindset for productivity," she commented while I was deep in a design project, comfortable in my favourite grey loungewear. "They're comfortable, Mom. I actually work better when I'm not distracted by uncomfortable clothing." I tried to explain, keeping my tone light. "Well, when I worked in the bank, we understood that dressing professionally affected our performance." She countered, referencing her career that had ended over 15 years ago. To keep the peace, I began adjusting my behaviours. I started waking up earlier to complete my cleaning tasks before she could inspect them. I changed my work schedule to accommodate her preference for family dinners at precisely 6 o'clock, even when it meant interrupting my creative flow. I began choosing my outfits more carefully, opting for presentable clothes, even on my most casual days. Dad noticed these changes. Sometimes I would catch him watching our interactions with a furrowed brow, but he rarely intervened directly. Instead, he would try to diffuse tension in subtle ways. "Janet, have you seen the new designs Aria completed for that big tech company? They're really impressive," he would say, attempting to redirect her attention to my accomplishments rather than perceived failings. During my physical therapy drives with Dad, he would sometimes express his gratitude privately. "Thanks for putting up with all this, sweetie. Your mum means well, she just gets set in her ways." I could see the signs of discomfort when Mum would criticise me in front of him, a slight wincing or subtle shake of his head, but his peacekeeping nature prevented him from confronting her directly. One evening, a minor incident over dinner preparation highlighted the growing tension. I had prepared a roast chicken with rosemary potatoes, following a recipe I had perfected over years. "The chicken is quite dry," Mum commented after her first bite, "and the potatoes could have used another 15 minutes. Dad quickly jumped in. "I think it's delicious, Aria." "The seasoning is perfect." Mum put down her fork with a sigh. "Robert, you would eat cardboard if someone put sauce on it." Aria needs constructive feedback to improve. The uncomfortable silence that followed spoke volumes. Dad gave me an apologetic look, while Mum continued eating as if nothing inappropriate had been said. That night, I called Samantha from the privacy of my room, keeping my voice low. "She's getting worse," I confessed, fighting back tears of frustration. "Nothing I do is right anymore. It's like she's looking for things to criticize." "That sounds really toxic, Aria," Samantha responded with concern. "Maybe it's time to establish some firmer boundaries or consider if staying there is still the right choice." "I can't leave yet," I sighed. "Dad still needs help and his recovery is going well. Leaving now would just create more problems." "Your mental health matters too," she reminded me gently. "I know. I'll try talking to her, setting some boundaries about the criticism. Maybe she doesn't realize how it's affecting me." After that call, I resolved to stand my ground more firmly while maintaining respect. I still believed that clear communication could resolve our issues. I had no idea how quickly the situation would deteriorate, or that attempting to establish those boundaries would trigger the explosion that was coming. As the 4th week began, Mum's behaviour crossed from merely critical to invasive. I first noticed it when I returned from a quick grocery run to find her sitting at my desk scrolling through my computer. "Mum, what are you doing?" I asked, shocked to find her browsing through my files. She didn't even look startled or guilty. "Just making sure everything is organised properly. Your desktop is cluttered with too many icons, Aria. It's not efficient." "That's my work computer with client files. Please don't access it without asking me first," I said as calmly as possible despite the violation I felt. "Don't be so dramatic. I'm your mother, not some stranger," she dismissed, finally standing up from my chair. This was just the beginning. Soon she was entering my room without knocking, regardless of whether I was changing clothes or in the middle of client calls. She began tidying my belongings, which meant reorganizing my carefully arranged work materials and personal items according to her preferences. During one important video conference with clients, she walked in unannounced with a basket of laundry, making herself visible in the background. "Sorry about that. I apologized to my clients after quickly ending the call. Mom, I was in the middle of a presentation. They seemed nice," she remarked, ignoring my concern. "But you should sit up straighter during professional calls. And that blouse washes out your complexion." The situation reached another level of tension when Mum confronted me about household expenses one evening. She slapped down a calculator and several receipts on the kitchen table while I was preparing dinner. "We need to discuss your financial contribution," she announced. "The electricity bill has increased 20% since you arrived. Plus the grocery expenses are considerably higher." I was taken aback. "Mum, I've been buying most of the groceries myself, and I gave Dad $400 toward household expenses when I moved in. That barely covers anything," she countered. "Do you know how much extra water you use with your long showers, or the Wi-Fi bandwidth your work consumes?" Dad, sitting in his recliner with his leg elevated, looked uncomfortable. "Janet, we agreed Aria staying here was a help, not a financial arrangement." "That was before I realized how much it would cost us," she replied sharply. "She has a successful career, she should contribute properly." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I've spent over $600 on groceries and household supplies since arriving, plus the money I gave Dad. And I've been driving him to all his appointments, which saves you time and gas money. Mum's face flushed with anger. "So now you're keeping score. After all we've done for you your entire life." The argument eventually dissipated without resolution, but it marked a turning point in our deteriorating relationship. The next day, I attempted to have a calm, reasonable conversation with her about boundaries. "Mum, I need some personal space and privacy to work effectively," I began as she folded laundry in the living room. "When you come into my room without knocking or go through my things, it makes me uncomfortable." Her response was immediate defensiveness. "I've never known a daughter who requires an appointment to speak with her mother. When you have children of your own someday, you'll understand there are no boundaries in a family. It's not about scheduling appointments, it's about basic respect for privacy," I tried to explain. "So now I'm disrespectful for caring about my daughter and her living space. Is that what your therapist in Portland taught you? That parents are the enemy?" Her voice rose with each question. "That's not what I'm saying at all." I sighed, recognizing the conversation was becoming unproductive. For a brief period afterward, she did knock before entering my room, but within days the boundary was violated again. The pattern became clear: temporary improvement, followed by resumed invasiveness, often worse than before the conversation. Meanwhile, work stress was mounting. I had taken on an important project for a potential long-term client based in Seattle, the same company that might offer me the creative director position. The deadline was approaching, and I needed focused time to complete the complex design elements. During a crucial client call discussing final revisions, Mum burst into the room with a vacuum cleaner. Despite my muted but frantic gestures for her to leave, she proceeded to vacuum around my desk, forcing me to apologize to the client for the background noise and reschedule the call. "That was completely inappropriate," I told her afterward, no longer able to hide my frustration. "You knew I was on an important call." "The house needs to be cleaned on schedule," she responded. "Your work shouldn't disrupt the entire household routine." Throughout all of this, Dad's health was steadily improving. He had progressed from using a walker to a cane, and his physical therapy sessions had been reduced from 3 times weekly to twice. He could now navigate the house more independently and had begun taking short walks around the neighborhood with me for additional exercise. As his physical strength returned, I noticed his growing awareness of the dysfunctional dynamic between Mum and me. Sometimes after a particularly tense exchange, he would find a moment alone with me. "Your mother has always been high-strung," he would say apologetically. "But this seems different. I haven't seen her this controlling in years." "Has she always been this way?" I asked during one of our neighborhood walks. He hesitated before answering. "She has her anxious periods, usually triggered by feeling things are out of her control. Your being here helping me instead of her being the primary caregiver might be bringing up some insecurities." I appreciated his insight but wondered why he didn't address the behavior directly with her. Later, I would understand that their marriage had settled into patterns that were difficult to break, with Dad accepting his role as peacekeeper rather than confronting the deeper issues in their relationship. As tensions continued to build, I found myself becoming increasingly anxious about returning home each time I took Dad to his appointments. The house that should have felt like a safe haven had become a minefield of criticism and conflict, with every interaction potentially triggering a new explosion. May 18th started like any other day, but it would become the breaking point in my relationship with my mother. I woke early to complete a critical component of my design project before a noon deadline. The Seattle company had requested additional elements that required intensive focus and creativity. I had explained to both parents the night before that I would need uninterrupted time in the morning. I understand completely, Dad had assured me. I'll make sure you get the space you need. Mum had nodded without commenting, which I should have recognized as a warning sign. By 7:30 in the morning, I was deep in my creative flow, making significant progress on the complex animations that would complement the static design elements. At 8:15, the first interruption came. Aria, did you take your breakfast dishes to the kitchen? Mum's voice called through the door, followed immediately by her entering without waiting for a response. I haven't had breakfast yet, Mum. I'm trying to finish this project first. I explained, not taking my eyes off the screen. Working without proper nutrition will affect your performance, she lectured, leaving the door wide open as she departed, allowing household noises to filter in. I got up to close the door and return to work. 20 minutes later, she appeared again, this time with a plate of toast and a cup of coffee. You need to eat, she insisted, placing them next to my computer dangerously close to my drawing tablet. Thank you, but I said I'd eat later, I replied carefully, moving the dishes to the far corner of the desk. A simple thank you would suffice. I went out of my way to bring you breakfast, she responded, lingering in the room to watch me work. Mum, I really need to focus. This deadline is crucial for my career. More important than appreciating your mother's efforts, apparently. The interruptions continued throughout the morning. Questions about laundry comments, about the weather inquiries, about when I would drive Dad to his appointment that afternoon, despite the fact that it was clearly marked on the family calendar as a 4 o'clock appointment. Each time, I attempted to respond patiently while firmly reminding her of my need for concentration. Each time she left with a comment about my attitude or priorities. Between interruptions, I managed to make progress, though not as efficiently as I had hoped. The breaking point came at 11:30, just 30 minutes before my deadline. I had nearly completed the final animation sequence and was making adjustments to the timing when Mum entered without knocking, carrying a basket of clean laundry. These need to be folded and put away before you leave for your father's appointment, she announced, placing the basket on my bed. Mum, I told you, I have a noon deadline. Dad's appointment isn't until 4. I'll handle the laundry afterward, I said, feeling my stress level rising as the clock ticked down. She moved behind me, looking over my shoulder at my screen. What is all this, anyway? Just shapes moving around. Doesn't seem very complicated to me. It's an interactive brand presentation. Each element is timed precisely to... I stopped mid-sentence as she reached past me toward my keyboard. This button with the house icon must save it right. You should save your work regularly, she said, pressing my keyboard before I could stop her. In that moment, several things happened at once. Instead of hitting the save button, she had clicked a combination of keys that closed the application. A dialog box appeared asking if I wanted to save changes, but before I could react, she clicked Don't Save, assuming she was helping by closing a pop-up. Just like that, 3 hours of unsaved work vanished. I sat in stunned silence, staring at the empty screen. The animation sequence I had meticulously crafted was gone. The timing adjustments, the color calibrations, the motion paths, all erased in an instant. What's wrong now? You look like someone died, Mum commented, apparently oblivious to what had just occurred. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain composure. Mom, you just deleted hours of my unsaved work that's due in 25 minutes. Well, you should have saved it, she replied defensively. That's basic computer knowledge, Aria. I was trying to help. I didn't ask for help, I said, my voice shaking with contained emotion. I asked for space to work. I specifically requested no interruptions this morning. Don't use that tone with me, she warned. I am still your mother and this is still my house. Something inside me snapped. The weeks of criticism, invasion of privacy, and dismissal of my needs culminated in this moment of profound disrespect. Yes, this is your house, which you've made abundantly clear. But that doesn't give you the right to interfere with my livelihood or treat me like an incompetent child, I said, standing up to face her directly. How dare you speak to me this way after everything I've done for you, providing a roof over your head, feeding you, accommodating your work when it disrupts our entire household routine. Her voice rose with each statement. I've tried to be respectful. I've adjusted my schedule, changed my habits, taken on household responsibilities. But nothing is ever good enough for you. I responded, no longer attempting to hide my frustration. Nothing is good enough. You've been nothing but selfish since you arrived. Your father needs care, and all you do is hide in this room with your precious computer. I drive Dad to every appointment. I help him with his exercises daily. I've been cooking most meals and buying groceries. How exactly am I being selfish? The argument escalated rapidly. Mum began bringing up past perceived failures, from childhood incidents to career choices she had disapproved of. Her voice grew louder, her accusations more personal and cutting. You always were the difficult one, headstrong, thinking you know better than everyone. No wonder Jason left you, who could tolerate such selfishness. The mention of my recent breakup information I had only shared with Dad in confidence felt like a deliberate wound. I had never told her the details of why Jason and I had separated, and her assumption that he had left me because of my character was both incorrect and intentionally hurtful. That's enough, I said quietly. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. You think you're so successful with your little computer drawings, but you couldn't even maintain a relationship, and now you're taking advantage of your father's condition to avoid facing your failures. Mum, stop, please, I pleaded, feeling tears threatening. No, you stop. Stop pretending you came here out of the goodness of your heart when we both know you're hiding from your real-life problems. You're 30 years old and have nothing to show for it but pictures on a screen. I gathered my composure and spoke as calmly as I could. I'm going to step outside and get some air. We can discuss this when we're both calmer. That's when she screamed the words that would change everything. Go ahead, get out and never come back. We were better off before you came, and we'll be better off when you're gone. I froze, shocked by the venom in her voice. In the doorway behind her, I glimpsed Dad's stunned face. He had made his way upstairs, perhaps hearing the raised voices, and arrived just in time to hear Mum's devastating command. Janet, he called out, his voice laced with disbelief. Mum whirled around momentarily, startled by his presence, then quickly recovered. Stay out of this, Robert. This is between Aria and me. I looked at my father, seeing the conflict and helplessness in his eyes. He took a step forward, but Mum moved to block his path to me. Aria knows I'm right, she continued. If she wants to leave, let her leave. In that moment, I made a decision. Okay, I said quietly. I'll go. Without another word, I began packing my essential belongings, hands shaking with emotion. Mum stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Minutes later, I heard their voices arguing downstairs, too muffled to distinguish words. As I packed my computer equipment and enough clothes for a few days, tears streamed down my face. The hurt was profound, not just from Mum's words, but from Dad's inability to intervene effectively. I understood his difficult position, but part of me had hoped he would stand up for me more definitively. Before leaving, I found a brief moment alone with him while Mum was in the backyard, presumably cooling off. I can't stay after that, Dad, I explained, voice breaking. I know, sweetheart. I'm so sorry, he whispered, embracing me awkwardly while balancing on his cane. This isn't right. Let me talk to her, get her to apologize. It's beyond apologies now, I replied. I'll check on you soon. Please do, he urged, pressing his spare house key into my palm. Use this if you need to come back when things are calmer. With a final hug and a promise to stay in touch, I loaded my car and drove away from my childhood home, tears blurring my vision as I tried to process the abrupt and painful severance from my family. The immediate aftermath of leaving my parents' home was a blur of raw emotion and practical challenges. I drove directly to Samantha's apartment, calling her from a grocery store parking lot once I had composed myself enough to speak coherently. I left, I said simply when she answered. Mum told me to get out and never come back, so I did. Oh my God, Aria, are you okay? Where are you? The concern in her voice brought fresh tears to my eyes. Physically fine, emotionally wrecked. Can I stay with you for a few days while I figure things out? Of course, I'm working from home today. Come right over. Samantha's one-bedroom apartment became my refuge. She cleared space in her living room, helping me set up a makeshift workstation on her dining table and insisting I take her bed while she used the pull-out couch. That first night, the emotional dam broke completely. Between sobs, I recounted the escalating tensions, the final confrontation, and the devastating ultimatum. Samantha listened without interruption, offering tissues, and eventually a glass of wine, as I purged weeks of accumulated hurt. "I keep checking my phone," I admitted, glancing at the dark screen for the 100th time. "Part of me expects an apology, or at least some acknowledgement from Dad." "Give it time," Samantha advised. "Your mom needs to cool down, and your dad is probably trying to navigate a difficult situation." But the phone remained silent. No calls, no texts, not even the usual forwarded joke emails my father enjoyed sending. The complete silence was almost more painful than the argument itself, confirming that I had indeed been cast out. Sleep eluded me that night, and for many nights afterward. When exhaustion finally claimed me, I would wake from dreams of confrontation, my mother's face contorted with anger, my father's expression of helpless distress. The words, "get out and never come back," echoed in my subconscious, jolting me awake in the early hours. Professionally, I was facing a crisis as well. I had missed the noon deadline for the Seattle company project, something that had never happened in my career. The morning after leaving home, I sent an apologetic email explaining that a family emergency had prevented completion, attaching the portions I had managed to salvage, and requesting a short extension. Their response was understanding but firm. "We sympathize with your situation, but our marketing timeline is fixed. We'll use what you've provided, but we'll need to bring in another designer to complete the elements. Unfortunately, this will affect our consideration for the creative director position." Just like that. The career opportunity I had been working toward slipped away, collateral damage from the family explosion. Rather than dwelling on this loss, I threw myself into other client projects, working long hours as both distraction and financial necessity. My laptop became both shield and window, protecting me from facing my emotions, while connecting me to work that provided structure amid chaos. By the 4th day at Samantha's, it became clear I needed a more permanent solution. Her generosity was boundless, but her small apartment wasn't designed for 2 working professionals. After an intensive online search, I found a month-to-month rental studio apartment within my budget. It was small with barely enough space for a bed and desk, but it offered independence and privacy I desperately needed. Moving into the empty apartment highlighted the abruptness of my departure from home. I had basic necessities, but none of the comforts accumulated over years. No proper kitchenware, minimal clothing, none of my books or personal mementos. The stark white walls and echoing space reflected the emptiness I felt inside. "We'll get you sorted," Samantha promised, helping me assemble a bed frame purchased from a discount furniture store. One thing at a time. Over the next 2 weeks, I established a survival routine. Work filled most of my waking hours, a convenient excuse to avoid processing the emotional devastation. I existed on takeout and microwave meals, lacking both equipment and motivation to cook properly. Sleep remained elusive, with insomnia giving way to exhaustion, only to be interrupted by anxiety dreams. The physical manifestations of stress became impossible to ignore. I lost 7 pounds in 10 days, clothes hanging loosely on my frame. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, and stress headaches became my constant companion. Despite Samantha's concerned suggestions, I resisted the idea of therapy, not ready to articulate the depth of my pain to a stranger. Throughout this period, I continued checking my phone obsessively, hope diminishing with each silent day. I drafted countless messages to my father, ranging from angry to pleading, but deleted them all unsent. Pride and hurt prevented me from making the first move, while fear of my mother intercepting communications added another layer of hesitation. "Have you considered reaching out to other family?" Samantha suggested during one of our coffee meetups. The question sparked a realization. My mother's sister, Aunt Lydia, had always been a voice of reason within the family. Though not particularly close in recent years, she had been a supportive presence throughout my childhood, often mediating family tensions. That evening, I found her number and made the call, uncertain of my reception. "Aria, what a lovely surprise!" Her warm voice answered immediately, comforting in its familiarity. "Aunt Lydia, I hope I'm not disturbing you," I began awkwardly. "Never, dear. Are you calling about your father's recovery? I heard the surgery went well." The simple question revealed the information gap. "Actually, Aunt Lydia, I'm not at my parents' home anymore. There was an incident with Mum, and I'm now living on my own." The ensuing conversation lasted nearly 2 hours as I explained the situation. Aunt Lydia listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never expressing disbelief or dismissal. "I wish I could say I'm surprised," she finally sighed. "Your mother has always struggled with control issues, even as a child. But this escalation is concerning. Was she always like this?" Dad mentioned anxious periods, but never elaborated. "Janet has had episodes throughout her life where her anxiety manifests as controlling behavior. After you were born, she experienced what might now be diagnosed as postpartum anxiety, though it wasn't recognized then. She became extremely protective and rigid about your care, pushing away help even when she needed it. This new perspective opened a door to understanding, though it didn't diminish the pain of rejection." Aunt Lydia went on to share insights about my mother's childhood with critical, demanding parents who rarely offered praise, creating patterns that echoed through generations. "This doesn't excuse her behavior toward you, Aria," she emphasized. "Understanding the source doesn't make the hurt less real." "What about Dad? Why doesn't he stand up to her more directly?" "Your father has always been a peacekeeper. He learned early in their marriage that confronting Janet during her anxious periods often escalated situations rather than resolving them. Over time, I think he developed a pattern of working around her moods rather than addressing the underlying issues." By the end of our conversation, I felt both heavier with new knowledge and lighter for having shared my burden. Aunt Lydia promised to check on my parents without revealing our discussion, giving me a potential connection without directly engaging. "Be gentle with yourself, Aria," were her parting words. "And remember that healing may require distance, at least for now." As the third week of separation began, I started establishing a more normalized life. I purchased a few houseplants to soften my sterile apartment, splurged on decent bedding to improve my sleep environment, and even hung a single piece of art, a print of Van Gogh's Almond Blossom, that Samantha had gifted as a housewarming present. "It represents new beginnings," she had explained, helping me position it where I could see it from bed. Something beautiful emerging after a dormant period. I appreciated the sentiment but couldn't yet embrace the optimism it represented. The silence from my family home had become a presence in itself, a void that grew rather than diminished with time. Each day without contact reinforced the finality of my mother's rejection and deepened my confusion about my father's apparent acquiescence. Then, exactly 23 days after I had walked out the door, my phone rang with my father's number. The sight of my father's name on my phone screen after more than 3 weeks of silence sent my heart racing. I almost missed the call, fumbling the device with trembling hands before managing to swipe to answer. "Dad," my voice came out as a whisper. "Aria, thank goodness. I was beginning to worry something happened to your phone." His familiar voice carried a mixture of relief and confusion that immediately struck me as odd. "My phone? No, it's been working fine," I replied, puzzled by this opening remark. "Well, that's good. Listen, honey, I know you're busy with work, but I wanted to check if everything's okay. You haven't been by the house in weeks, and I'm wondering why you've stopped visiting." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. I sank onto the edge of my bed, trying to process his words. "Stopped visiting Dad? What are you talking about?" "Your visits during my afternoon naps. Your mother mentioned you've been stopping by while I'm resting, but it's been at least 3 weeks now. I figured you must be swamped with that big project, but I've been missing our chats." A cold realization washed over me. "Dad, I haven't been to the house since I left. Not once." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed, becoming smaller and uncertain. "What do you mean, since you left?" "Your mother said you moved out for work reasons, that your apartment was closer to potential clients. She said you were still coming by regularly to check on me." My hand tightened around the phone as anger and disbelief surged through me. "That's not what happened, Dad. Mom told me to get out and never come back." Those were her exact words. "You were there. You heard her say it." "I heard the argument," he acknowledged slowly. "But afterwards, Janet said you had both agreed it was better for you to have your own space, that the arrangement wasn't working for either of you. She said it was an amicable decision." The revelation of my mother's deception left me momentarily speechless. All these weeks, she had been lying to him, creating a fictional narrative where I was still part of their lives, while simultaneously cutting me off completely. "Dad, none of that is true. After she screamed at me to get out, I packed my things and left. I've been staying first with Samantha, then found this tiny studio apartment. I've been checking my phone constantly, waiting for some contact from either of you. I thought..." My voice broke. "I thought you had chosen her side." His stunned silence was followed by a shaky exhalation. Oh, Aria, I had no idea. I swear to you I didn't know. Janet told me you were fine, that you were focusing on your career, that we were giving you space to establish yourself. She never told you that she deleted my work, that she called me selfish and said Jason left me because I was intolerable. No, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She said you had a minor disagreement about household responsibilities that led to a mutual decision about living arrangements. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. Not only had my mother rejected me and driven me from my home, but she had systematically lied to my father to cover her actions, robbing me of his support during the most painful weeks of my life. I've been completely alone, Dad. I lost the Seattle job opportunity because I missed the deadline that day. I've been barely sleeping, hardly eating, thinking neither of you wanted anything to do with me anymore. His quiet sob broke through the phone. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I had no idea. I would never ever have let this happen if I'd known the truth. How did you finally realize something was wrong? I asked. Little inconsistencies started adding up. Janet would mention you had visited, but nothing in the house seemed changed. No coffee cup in the sink, no sign of your presence. Then last week I asked a specific question about how your Seattle project had turned out, and she gave a vague answer about it going well. It didn't feel right. The thought of my mother fabricating an entire alternate reality where I was still visiting, still succeeding professionally, still part of the family, while actually cutting me off completely, was almost too painful to comprehend. Dad, she's been lying to you for weeks, about everything. I think we need to talk in person, he said after a moment. Not at the house, somewhere neutral. Are you free tomorrow afternoon? We arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway between my apartment and their home, a place neither of us had visited before. As we ended the call, Dad's voice cracked with emotion. I've missed you so much, Aria. I thought you were just busy, but something felt wrong. I should have trusted that feeling sooner. I've missed you too, Dad, more than I can say. After hanging up, I sat motionless on my bed trying to process this new reality. The past 3 weeks of grief and abandonment had been built on deliberate deception. The mother I thought had rejected me completely had instead been creating an elaborate fiction to hide her actions from my father. The pain wasn't lessened by this knowledge, but transformed into something more complex, tinged with anger at the calculated nature of the deception. The next day, I arrived at the cafe 20 minutes early, too anxious to remain in my apartment. I selected a quiet corner table and ordered a coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink, watching the door with mounting anticipation and dread. When Dad finally appeared, the sight of him stopped my breath. In just 3 weeks, he seemed to have aged years. Though he was walking without his cane, a testament to his continued physical recovery, his face was drawn with new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. He scanned the cafe anxiously until our eyes met and the naked relief on his face triggered my own tears. He crossed to me quickly, arms opening for an embrace. I rose to meet. We held each other tightly, both crying, without shame, in the middle of the quiet cafe. Let me look at you, he said finally, holding me at arm's length. His expression shifted from joy to concern as he noted my weight loss and the shadows under my eyes. Oh, Aria. As we settled at the table, the full story emerged from both sides. I shared the escalating tensions leading to the final confrontation, while Dad revealed the elaborate web of lies Mum had constructed in my absence. According to her fictitious narrative, I had moved out amicably to be closer to work, was thriving professionally, and visited regularly while he napped in the afternoons. She even mentioned specific conversations we supposedly had, details about your work projects, updates on your friends, he explained, still visibly processing the scale of the deception. When I'd ask why I never saw you anymore, she'd say, our schedules just weren't aligning, that you were respecting my recovery by not disturbing my rest routine. Did you ever suspect she was lying, Kurt? I asked. Not at first. It all seemed plausible if disappointing. But last week I intentionally skipped my afternoon nap and waited downstairs telling her I wanted to surprise you when you visited. She became flustered, said you had texted that you couldn't make it that day. When I asked to see the message, she claimed she'd already deleted it. That was when his suspicions had solidified, leading to more pointed questions and eventually to the phone call that revealed the truth. Has she always been like this, Dad? I asked hesitantly. Aunt Lydia mentioned Mum has had episodes throughout her life. Dad sighed deeply, running a hand through his thinning hair. Your mother has struggled with anxiety and control issues for as long as I've known her, but it's been worse at certain times. After you were born, she had a particularly difficult period. The doctor called it nerves back then, but today it would probably be diagnosed as a form of anxiety disorder. Why didn't you ever tell me this? We thought we were protecting you, and for many years, Janet managed well with occasional therapy. This recent episode is the worst I've seen since you were very young. He looked down at his untouched coffee. I've enabled her behavior in many ways, Aria, finding ways around her control rather than addressing it directly. I thought I was keeping the peace, but I've let both of us down. The raw honesty in his admission touched me deeply. For the first time, I was seeing my father not as the passive peacekeeper, but as someone who had made difficult choices within a complicated relationship, sometimes wisely, sometimes not. What happens now? I asked the question, encompassing more than I could articulate. First, I need to confront Janet with the truth. This deception crossed a line I can't ignore. His voice was gentle, but carried a new firmness I wasn't accustomed to hearing. Then I think we need professional help both as a couple and for Janet individually. I've already researched some options. And us, you and me, I couldn't keep the vulnerability from my question. We rebuild starting now, he answered without hesitation. I want regular time with you, independent of what happens with your mother. Whether that's dinner once a week, regular phone calls, whatever works for your schedule. I'm not losing my daughter again. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope breaking through the cloud of hurt and rejection. My father's acknowledgement of the situation and commitment to change offered a path forward, even if reconciliation with my mother remained uncertain. As we parted outside the cafe, Dad embraced me again, whispering, I'm going to make this right, Aria. It won't happen overnight, but I promise you things will change. Watching him drive away, I believed him. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in our understanding of what had happened, but in my father's determination to address the underlying issues that had enabled the situation in the first place. The truth had finally emerged, painful and complicated, but real. And in that reality, painful as it was, lay the possibility of genuine healing. The weeks following my reunion with Dad marked the beginning of a careful, sometimes painful journey toward healing for our entire family. True to his word, Dad confronted Mum about her deception the very evening after our cafe meeting. The conversation, as he later described it, was one of the most difficult of their marriage. I laid out everything I knew, all the inconsistencies I had noticed, and finally the truth I had learned from you, he explained during one of our regular phone calls. At first, she denied everything, claimed you were exaggerating or misunderstanding. But when I held firm, she broke down. According to Dad, Mum's eventual admission came with rationalizations rather than a true apology. She claimed she had been trying to protect him during his recovery, that she feared the stress of family conflict would hinder his healing. She insisted her actions, while perhaps misguided, were motivated by care rather than control. I made it clear that regardless of her intentions, the behavior was unacceptable. Dad said a new firmness in his voice that still surprised me. I told her that our relationship as a couple and her relationship with you both depended on her getting professional help. The ultimatum was unprecedented in their marriage, a line drawn after decades of accommodation and peacekeeping. Mum initially resisted the idea of therapy, arguing that family matters should remain private, but Dad remained unwavering. Therapy or separation became the choice, one he presented not as punishment, but as necessity. Meanwhile, Dad and I established our own healing rhythm. We met weekly for lunch at a neutral restaurant, carefully avoiding discussions of Mum during our first few meetings, focusing instead on rebuilding our connection. He shared updates on his physical recovery, now almost complete, while I cautiously opened up about my struggles since leaving home. I still have nightmares about that day, I admitted during our third lunch. Not just Mum screaming at me to leave, but the silence afterward, thinking you both had cut me out completely. That silence will haunt me forever, he responded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Knowing you were suffering alone while I believed everything was fine. I failed you, Aria, and I am so deeply sorry. His willingness to accept responsibility without deflection helped heal some of the deepest wounds. There was no attempt to minimize my experience or rationalize his inaction, just honest acknowledgement and genuine remorse. By our fifth weekly meeting, Dad shared news that Mum had finally agreed to see a therapist, a psychiatric specialist recommended by their family doctor. The initial assessment raised concerns about anxiety disorder with some obsessive-compulsive tendencies, he explained carefully. She's been prescribed medication and will begin regular sessions next week. How did she take the diagnosis? I asked, both curious and apprehensive. Better than I expected. I think part of her is relieved to have a framework for understanding behaviours that have probably troubled her for years, even if she couldn't admit it. While Mum's treatment began, I finally took Samantha's advice and started seeing a therapist of my own, a compassionate woman specialising in family trauma. The sessions helped me contextualise my experience, understanding both the depth of the injury inflicted and the generational patterns that had contributed to our family dysfunction. Your mother's behaviour was unquestionably harmful, my therapist emphasised, but understanding the likely roots doesn't mean excusing the impact on you. Both things can be true simultaneously. She was acting from her own untreated mental health condition, and you were deeply hurt by her actions. This perspective helped me navigate the complex emotions surrounding potential reconciliation. I wasn't ready to see my mother yet. A boundary both Dad and my therapist fully supported, but I was beginning to see a path where future contact might be possible under the right conditions. About 6 weeks after Dad discovered the truth, he proposed a carefully structured family therapy session with all 3 of us present. The suggestion immediately triggered anxiety. I don't know if I'm ready for that, I admitted during our phone call. That's completely valid, he assured me. There's no timeline here. I suggested it to the therapist as an eventual goal, not an immediate step. What would it involve exactly? A neutral setting with a professional mediator, clear boundaries established beforehand, and an exit option for you at any point if it becomes too much, he explained. But again, only when and if you feel prepared for that step. 2 more weeks passed as I considered the possibility discussing it thoroughly with my own therapist. What are you most afraid might happen in that meeting? She asked during one session. That Mum will deny everything again, or minimise it, or make it seem like I'm overreacting. That Dad will slip back into his peacekeeper role instead of holding her accountable. Those are legitimate concerns based on established patterns, she acknowledged. But consider this, what evidence have you seen of change in your father's behaviour since this all happened? The question made me reflect on the transformation I had witnessed. Dad had moved from conflict avoidance to direct confrontation, from accepting Mum's narrative to investigating inconsistencies, from enabling her control to establishing firm boundaries with consequences. These weren't small adjustments, but fundamental shifts in long-standing dynamics. He's different, I realised aloud. More direct, more willing to uphold boundaries even when it's uncomfortable. And that suggests that maybe the old patterns don't have to repeat themselves. The insight didn't eliminate my anxiety, but it opened space for possibility. After several more days of reflection, I agreed to a first family session with extensive conditions. It would be held at the therapist's office, limited to exactly 1 hour, and I would arrive and leave separately from my parents. The day of the meeting arrived with a mixture of dread and tentative hope. I arrived early, allowing time with the therapist, Dr. Levine, to centre myself before my parents' arrival. When they entered the comfortable office space, I saw Mum for the first time in over 2 months. The woman who walked hesitantly through the door looked smaller, somehow less formidable than the towering figure in my memory. Her hair had more grey than I remembered, her posture less rigid. When our eyes met, hers immediately filled with tears. But she respected my boundary and took her seat without attempting physical contact. Thank you all for being here. Dr. Levine began, her calm presence immediately diffusing some of the tension. We've established some ground rules for today's session. We'll practice active listening without interruption, focus on feelings rather than debate factual accounts, and respect each person's experience as valid for them. The session proceeded carefully, with each of us given uninterrupted time to express our experience of what had happened. Dad spoke of his guilt and determination to create healthier patterns. I shared the devastation of rejection and abandonment, the struggle to rebuild my life alone, and my cautious hope for healing. When Mum's turn came, I braced myself for deflection or denial. Instead, her voice quavering, she surprised me. I've spent my life believing I could control uncertainty through sheer will, she began softly. When Aria moved back home, I felt my role as caregiver being usurped, my routines disrupted. Instead of recognizing my anxiety, I projected it as criticism and control. She looked directly at me for the first time. I told myself I was helping, that you needed guidance, that my way was best. When you established boundaries, I experienced it as rejection and reacted with increasingly desperate attempts to regain control. The day I told you to leave was the culmination of panic, not rational thought, and afterward, I couldn't face what I'd done. Her acknowledgement, while not erasing the pain, was more than I had expected. There was no request for immediate forgiveness, no expectation of resumed closeness, just an honest accounting of her actions and their roots. As the session concluded, Dr. Levine asked if we would consider meeting again the following month. I agreed tentatively, recognizing this as a small but significant step forward. Outside the office, standing in the parking lot, Mum approached me with obvious hesitation. Aria, I know today doesn't fix what happened. I just want you to know I'm committed to doing the work however long it takes. I nodded, unable to offer more in that moment, but acknowledging her effort. Dad embraced me briefly before they departed, whispering, "So proud of you, sweetheart." The months that followed brought gradual, incremental healing. Monthly family sessions continued, supplemented by individual therapy for all three of us. Mum remained consistent in her treatment, taking medication regularly and developing new coping strategies for her anxiety. Dad maintained his newfound assertiveness, no longer allowing issues to fester beneath a surface of false peace. I moved forward with my career, eventually securing a different creative position in Seattle, one that offered even greater opportunities than the one I had lost. The distance proved beneficial, allowing me to establish a life independent of family dynamics, while maintaining connection on my own terms. 6 months after that first family session, Mum and I had our first one-on-one meeting, a carefully bounded lunch at a restaurant halfway between our homes. The conversation was sometimes awkward, occasionally tense, but fundamentally different from our previous pattern. "I'm learning to recognize when anxiety is driving my behavior," she shared. "It's like having worn the same distorting glasses for decades and suddenly seeing clearly. I don't always catch it in the moment, but I'm getting better at pausing before reacting." I acknowledged her progress while maintaining my boundaries. "I appreciate the work you're doing, Mom. It matters, but rebuilding trust will take time." "I know," she replied with a humility that would have been unimaginable before. "I'm here for the long haul, Aria, whatever that looks like." As I drove home from that lunch, I reflected on the journey of the past 8 months. The pain of that day, when Mum had screamed for me to get out, would never completely fade. But it no longer defined our relationship entirely. We were finding a new way forward, one based on honest communication, respected boundaries, and the recognition of unhealthy patterns. The family I had now was not the idealized version I had once imagined, nor was it the dysfunctional system I had fled. It was something more nuanced, more real. A family working consciously to break generational patterns, to heal individual wounds, to create relationships based on choice rather than obligation. In choosing to walk away that day, I had ultimately created space for something healthier to emerge. The words "get out and never come back" that had once shattered my world had paradoxically opened the door to authentic healing. Not through forgetting or minimizing the hurt, but through confronting it directly and demanding change. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you love to protect yourself? Did distance help you gain perspective on unhealthy relationship patterns? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with others who might need to hear that sometimes walking away is the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that establishing boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for genuine relationships to flourish.